Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to let you know, we'll get started in about 1 minute. Hi, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. Just to let you know, we'll start the presentation in about 30 seconds. An official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, Out of Sight, Out of Service, the Hidden Risk in Your AED Program, sponsored by Rescue Stat. This is Alan Ferguson. I'm Associate Editor at Safety and Health and co-host of the On the Safe Side podcast, and I'll be moderating today's event. Thank you once again for joining us, and before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. As a disclaimer, the views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the council of the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session with our speakers. If you have a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and press the send button. We welcome your questions at any time during today's event. You don't have to wait for the Q&A to begin. We might not get to every question, but the good news is unanswered questions will be forwarded to today's sponsor. Also, after this presentation, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. Just to let you know, this webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. So you may also receive a link in our post-event email. With that, let's introduce our speakers. With us today are Dana Miller and Jeremy Gruber. Dana is the Chief Experience Officer at Rescue Stat, a Boise, Idaho-based healthcare technology company specializing in AED program management and remote monitoring solutions. In nearly 2 decades at Rescue Stat, Dana has been instrumental in shaping her organization's customer-centric approach while emphasizing education, compliance, and long-term AED readiness. Jeremy is the founder and owner of Rescue One Training for Life Incorporated, a prominent safety training and product solutions organization based in Gaithersburg, Maryland. With a distinguished career spanning over 30 years, he made a significant impact as a captain, firefighter, paramedic, respiratory therapist, and entrepreneur. Dana, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Hey, Jeremy, excited to kind of have the conversation today. It's interesting. I just was coming back from a vacation, and it's fascinating to think about AED programs and all the different things that come about. And on vacation, I was at a hotel and noticed that in the gym, the AED was non-functioning. And so I'm just, it's immediate red flags often when I'm traveling around and being in this industry for as long as I have, I know I can't walk around and not stare at every single AED I see on the wall. Um, so have you ever kind of run into a scenario in your, where you see red flags immediately?
Oh, Dan, it's unfortunately it's common. I've seen it so many times in my past 30 years of doing this. I tried to bring it to people's attention from, like you said, traveling in a hotel. There's not a lot of people out there, unless they have a vested interest in a program, that really pay attention to the AEDs. So it's really hard, for these programs to be up and running and be ready at all times without really a champion or a management of a program that is, having someone come in and actually take charge of making sure devices are ready. So yeah, it happens a lot. I could probably tell you hundreds of stories over my times of doing this, in very prominent places to not so prominent places, that they all had similar problems, that the AEDs were not tended to properly.
Yeah, and it feels like the most common, like in that scenario, as I go up to the front desk and I let them know, hey, like you have a defibrillator in the gym. The common response is repeating what that is. not really understanding what the question even is or what we're talking about.
What's an AED?
Yeah, right. Like you're defining all of it in the same process. So it's, like it's really concerning when, yeah, like the front desk doesn't even know what we're talking about or even where it's located. In this scenario, it was just that the pads hadn't been connected to the device, luckily. So it wasn't that it was completely faulty. It was just that it wasn't like ready, right? Which is its own problem. Give an example of what you've run into.
I went into a school system once, and I went in, and the AED was placed in the cabinet. They had three AEDs. The batteries were never placed in the device, and the pads were never connected. And some of it didn't even have the pads and the batteries; just had an AED that had no battery or pads. So the devices would not have functioned. Or if they had a need, they would have had to put the device together at that point. So I've seen that way too many times. So when people get an AED, unless there's somebody that's really putting it together on site, they may not have the full experience of understanding the readiness of it when it gets to be deployed and be ready to be used by the end user. So that's a big red flag, because they get the box in the mail and UPS or FedEx drops it off, and the next thing is, if it's not already put together for them, someone has to figure it out. And sometimes it always doesn't get together properly and put in a place that is appropriate for being accessible to the group that it's being meant for.
Right. I mean, I've also noticed, right, like the person who ordered it isn't the person who's going to receive it. So maybe it just sits there in a box for a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, this slide here kind of speaks to the experience we were just talking through, right? AED's not working when needed, so it's been shipped to them. They have the product, but maybe that's not the person who's going to really, oversee that particular program, not understood where it's going to be, placed within the facility. So it's, the examples that we've run into over time are, I mean, really, it's just that, they were charged with ordering the AED, but once it's now arrived, who's really responsible for making sure that it's getting placed, and then there's proper communication that goes out to the organization that this is a new device or a new life-saving piece of equipment that we've acquired. It's been installed here. This is what it's for. We're going to get people trained, like pulling every kind of people or the whole organization in.
Absolutely. It's lacking a quarterback. I mean, you have a team of people,
Right.
but if no one's kind of leading the charge of how we're going to make this play work, there's a big problem. So just having an AD definitely is not enough in most cases. And training is so important, because having the ability to have people aware of where it's at, how to use it, and provide CPR and recognize the problem of when the time to use an AED and when to provide CPR and get help on the way is appropriate. So depending on where it's at, it takes that champion, that quarterback, to make sure all these things are taking place. And it's not just putting an AED on the wall. Obviously, it's having a program wrapped around an AED. It's the whole, have you got everything in place that's appropriate to hopefully have successful outcomes when you take the responsibility of putting an AED at a place. It's really about the program.
Completely agree. Yeah, I mean, as we think about like maintaining visibility to these, to these AEDs, have you seen a time when this really lacks, right? It lacks the visibility and has had serious consequences?
Absolutely. I think, that quarterback, that champion, needs to consult with somebody who is familiar with where AED should be placed in visible places and flow paths of where people are, so that, if it's in a workplace, is it centrally located in the workplace? Is it near places where people are going to be on a regular basis, and visualize it so they know where their AED is? Is it well, pronounced in that area that it sticks out, that people know where it's at if you have to send somebody to go get it? Is it a multi-story building where you have them on each floor, does it make sense to put them in an elevator lobby or in the lunchroom or in a place that is common and where people know where to go grab it and it's centrally located? So placement is really important, and visibility, so that when the time comes that you need it, you're able to direct somebody, if they're not familiar with it, is to where it is so they can find it very quickly, or it's just a common place that everyone knows in the building where they'll be, and which is challenging at times, but a little forethought going in placement and location make a big difference when they actually have to respond and react to a situation.
Yeah, I mean, have you run into it? Like, have you seen any serious consequences from these types of scenarios where, it was placed in a visible spot, but maybe nobody accessed the device?
Well, in the heat of the moment, that's when it really counts. And then part of that is having people aware. So I have seen those situations where an AED did not get used because there was no one around that was necessarily trained, and people weren't in the thought process they had to grab it. So that has happened. And it depends on where it is. And over time, we've gotten better because dealing with AEDs for 30 plus years, people were kind of like, we're going to hide them away. We're going to put them in a drawer. I've been in many buildings where if it's a secure building where you get into it, they had them in a desk drawer. And I surveyed them and asked, where's your AED? And it took about 10 minutes to figure out it was in the drawer next to the computer, that if it, and that device was never serviced, so it actually wasn't even ready to be used. So it's really having, like I said, once again, it comes back to that champion or that team to make sure that you're using best practices, and that is putting them in places where they can be seen and gotten to very timely fashion. They're on a wall typically, in visible, very marked AED signs that are up, boxes that potentially can alarm to alert other people in the area that something's going on. So having, a program, and it's a program, where you can look at time from drop to shock. How long is it going to take from when someone collapses to go get a device, to come back to a person, then apply it to the person, then use it? And the AHA, recommends 3 minutes. So we don't really want to be more than 60 seconds away from going to grab an AED and then going back 60 seconds with 60 seconds to apply it, and then applying, hopefully, if there's a shock need at the first shock. So we look at that 3-minute time frame, and we want to make sure that we're putting it in places that we can get to it timely, with a 70% chance of survival after 3 minutes. We want to look at locations to be in locations where it's in a flow path for people to be able to get to a device and back to the patient in a timely fashion, in a centrally located location within the facility that we're trying to protect.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of what we see is that there's not clear emergency action plans in place, right? So maybe they are covering a few of these things. So maybe they've trained their staff, they have placed it in a visible spot, and they have good visibility to it. But that was in September when they implemented the program, and here is 2 years later. Are those same people still involved with the program? Who's maintaining that device? Who's, like you said, who's the quarterback? Who's the champion? And in the space that we've lived, really kind of overseeing and monitoring these programs, that's been one of the biggest. It might start out really, really strong, but acquiring the AED is really seen as like the starting point, but I'm sorry, the finish line, but it really is like the very beginning of
Almost
the
a starting
process.
point, because I've been to locations, and this is federal government, city government, county government, where, like you said, the champion has changed and may no longer be there. No one picked up the responsibility. We did a donation of about 100 AEDs about 10 years ago to a city government, and went in to do a presentation, and they wondered why we needed program management. We take care of our own AEDs. And I don't know what made me do this, but they did have one AED in the facility that I was in. And I said, let's go check your AED. And we went and looked at that AED, and the battery had been dead for about 4 years. The pads were expired 6 years. No one ever touched that AED from the day they installed it. And then it was kind of fortuitous. It went to, like, this is why you need an AED program, because you said you had a program and this device wouldn't have worked if you tried to use it, which is the biggest liability, because Good Samaritan laws cover you. And that's great. But when you put an AED in place and then you don't properly maintain it, I see that as really the only liability you have. If you have an AED that you've committed to putting in a facility and then you don't maintain it properly and it doesn't work when you need it, that becomes a challenge with liability. But other than that, I mean, everything else should flow. So in that situation with that particular group, they're like, oh, we see why we need program management now, or at least somebody to make sure that the pads and batteries are, replaced in a timely fashion. And if there's a use, that it gets serviced and it gets maintained properly. So those are the things that, you need to kind of let people know who put a program in place, that those pieces are really important. And then in today's world of AEDs, when we are now compared to years ago, there's so much more ability today to monitor an AED program remotely, or with technology and with email, with many different ways of talking to people, or being able to look at a device from the technology standpoint to managing programs. So, what readiness looks like is making sure staff are aware where devices are. Maintenance, whether it's done through technology or done through personnel, and then making sure people are trained, and then creating that atmosphere that people will respond when something happens. And that's taking the fear away, and doing training and drills on a somewhat regular basis, that people can not feel like they're going to be overwhelmed if they had to do something. So having practiced it before they need to do it makes a lot of sense. So drills are always good, or lunch and learns, or just kind of bringing it up and talking about if something happened. Maybe having someone come in and do a drill on odd years if you have training only every other year. But those are all things that can keep people prepared, because it really comes down to people. I mean, having the right equipment is a big piece, but having people that will react and respond is even the bigger piece. Whether you have an AED or not, CPR will provide obviously a lot of assistance to somebody who is in cardiac arrest and buys time to get an AED there if there's not one readily available. But once an AED is there, I mean, that is going to be the focal point of, that's electric medicine makes a huge difference when someone's in cardiac arrest.
Yeah, I'm curious actually, and maybe you just answered this, but like I feel like with the entity that you donated the AEDs to, right? What was the turning point to help them realize, like, from that experience they're doing it right, right? Like,
I had people all bought into program management. We donate the AEDs, but we wanted them to have them on program management. But I went to a meeting of with the mayor's group, and one of them was a risk manager, and the risk manager of all people was like, why do we really need program management? We maintain these ourselves. And I don't know, like I said, what made me go up and say, let's go check your AED in the lobby and just look at it and see how we're doing with that. And
okay.
just out of sheer luck, that AED hadn't been touched since the day it was installed. And I think right then and there, everyone realized the value of having somebody look over your program and manage it, whether it's a third service or having, someone responsible internally. But apparently they had about 5 or 6 AEDs already, and there was a couple of the places that did maintain their AED, and then the rest of the AEDs within that city were not maintained, and they were not ready for use, and they would have not functioned had they needed to use them.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I would say, yeah, from my experience, luckily we are mostly working with people who are in it, advising through program management, right? But I would say the most common thing that we've run into for the most prepared organizations, they're ones that have somebody that's truly invested and responsible for the program. So, the champion or the quarterback, as you mentioned earlier, I think having those people are like really, really critical to making sure you have a prepared organization, because I mean, they care, right? And if they transition, they're transitioning into a program, or sorry, they're more likely as they transition out of their role to not forget that this is a big piece that goes with it.
Right. I just saw that just recently, and it's sad. One of the communities we work with who have hundreds and hundreds of AEDs had cardiac arrest on Monday, and without getting too much into it, they redid that building, and the building itself, they were requesting new AEDs, but they never got the AEDs put in time. And this is a group that has hundreds of buildings, and that building, for some reason, didn't get the AED put back in it after the remodeling, because no one requested it to happen with the right tools. And there was a death on on this week because there wasn't an AED available for someone who went into a cardiac arrest in that building. That just happened on Monday. So the program is only as good as information that is given back to the people who support programs or who manage programs. So you're only as strong as your weakest link, and that became a very weak link in that program because the person retired last year who was really the quarterback of the program, and there was never a quarterback put in place after that person left. There were people that were on the team, but no one was quarterbacking the program. So, for information to flow from an organization to whoever they use or however they manage their program, it's very important that information is able to be gotten back to the people responsible, because obviously having a program in place involves people within the program to communicate to the vendors or the team who's actually managing and facilitating checking equipment and making sure equipment is in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Like that's such a big part of the transition, and that it's also what the beauty of the recent years have created in AED program and technology, right? So as we kind of look to this information, in the last, there's been new AEDs that come to market, which are awesome. That's far and few in between, but that do have more capabilities as far as monitoring these AEDs, or newer technology that is, outside of the device that assists in monitoring these AEDs. And so it's, I think it's becoming more common to have more of the quarterbacks in organizations because AEDs and programs are becoming more common,
Yes.
or at least understood, at least, and I think that the fascinating thing with some of the recent technology is it is allowing those who have the quarterback and the people who have invested in really that program management, they're seeing that there's now greater visibility. So the one champion that had the responsibility to this AED program, they've invested in partnering with somebody to help oversee it and manage it and realize that this is not a singular person's role. And now with this remote monitoring technology, it gives that visibility, right, to your scenario of the 100 AEDs, and supposedly it's being monitored internally and they're tracking it. It gives sight to say, oh, this AED did not pass its inspection, and allows a proactive approach versus kind of having to react to what customers are telling us. We can jump right in front of it and push people the right way.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
do
Yes.
you see what kind of role do you think remote oversight plays in creating accountability to programs?
I think depending on the customer and their need and the size of their program, it would differ between unique customers and what is appropriate for them. But I've recently been putting some very large programs in place for organizations throughout the US and then locations potentially around the world. And the technology today is so much different than it was last year versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago. So depending on when you implement a program and what was available, you maybe have gone with the best technology of that day. But it seems like technology is continually changing for the better, for allowing for the ability to monitor an AED program with cellular, with Wi-Fi, with remote ability for checking an AED with radio frequency, checking an AED on Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and Internet of Other Things technology, IoT technology, and the cellular technology, depending on the device and depending on what's available. There's about 10 different ways to monitor devices now, where 5 years ago it may have been 2 or 3. So the ability to monitor devices remotely has improved dramatically over the last few years, and I'm sure it's going to even improve more in time. But you're getting sometimes real-time data as to an AED is in use at the moment with the new technology. So once pads are placed, you could get an email and potentially in the future a text that an AED is being used at a certain location in progress. And you can also have the technology that just lets you know that your AED is okay, it's where it needs to be, and the functionality of it's good because of the different unique ways of managing the device from the technology that's out there today. So depending on the need of that organization, you have a number of different ways to see real-time tracking of the device from a number of different viewpoints as to what you'd want to see. So there's a lot of different opportunity now to have a dashboard in a program that'll let you see all of your devices across the country. And if there's anything that stands out that's not working, it'll come to immediate attention, so you don't have to worry about, the employee that's checking it. You still want people to check their AEDs, make sure that they know where it's at. It gives them a reason to make sure they know where the AED is. Have somebody on site that you can call if there's a problem or a question. But using that technology proactively just makes a program so much more seamlessly in place, positively working the way it needs to work.
Yeah, I mean, as the industry has kind of moved to more technology, which is awesome. Initially, I was just like, whoa, okay, we can't take the people out of the scenario, right? Like we don't want, as we mentioned, very out of sight, out of mind concept. So now the technology is going to be doing all the things. I don't even think about it. Right. And that's not the goal. The goal is just to make it more seamless and keep people focused on people things and technology focused on technology things, right? What do each of those parties do best? And so it is really maximizing the ability for people to be focused on, like the things that they do best and where they add the most value, and running around and checking individual AEDs on a monthly basis to make sure that the status indicator is good may not be the best use of time if technology can tell us that, yep, everything's good to go. These are the ones we want you to look at because these are the ones that have indicated an issue. So I think it's been really great, in that perspective. It's not taking people out of the picture. It's just maximizing people's ability to focus on what they need to.
Right. And then as well, we ask people to look at these things typically on a monthly basis. And if something happened in between the time they looked at it, the technology could pick up if it's a problem. So it just gives you another set of eyes on the program. And it brings up, any issues that may have come up between that last look from the human part of the factor of it. And it raises the hand and says, hey, come look at me. There might be something going on that we then would investigate immediately and not have the possibility of it not functioning when we need it to function.
Yep, totally. Yeah, technology's played a huge role. And I think kind of when you think through, getting companies more invested in the technology, and these AED programs, not being afraid of it, right, is kind of key. It's a positive impact to these programs, and like you said, creating the visibility that's necessary for large fleets of AEDs or even mobile devices that may be harder for people to access, giving greater visibility into what those look like on a regular basis. So
yeah, absolutely. When you're putting a program together for something that is like mobile, so there's some best practice devices that you're gonna want to use with high IP ratings, with maybe pads that won't weep or freeze and heat or cold, maybe a silver nitrate based pad, and then maybe where it's on a utility truck or in vehicles where it may not have somebody with it all the time to look at it on a regular basis, or it is looked at on somewhat of a regular basis, but then there's a problem in between them looking at it like any other place. You're going to have that raise its hand and say there's a problem. So, looking at the whole functionality of a program when it comes to making sure you have the best equipment and then the best monitoring system and then the best practices in place really play a big dividend when you need to use your device. It just keeps that program at its highest level and functioning well for that customer, to make sure that they can relax knowing that their equipment's going to work when it's needed, and that hopefully the people that would use it have had some knowledge and training, so it'll be a seamless response and the equipment will function the way it needs to function.
yeah, what do you think? Like there's so many simple steps, right, that people can take to kind of become a little bit more proactive. What would you say? I mean, I guess this makes it pretty clear, but have you had examples of people who've kind of gone from this reactive mode and kind of adopted this more proactive approach of technology?
Yeah, I think it's been a change agent to communicate to people what best practices are being established, because people are not aware, obviously yourself and myself, what is available and what the technology is and what best practices are out there. So organizations that work with AEDs and the technology to monitor them, should have like a checklist for customers, almost a play sheet, and that play sheet, it should have all these common things that we talk about today, as to who's going to be trained, what device makes the most sense for the locations we're going to be putting them at, what's the best technology within the device or remotely to monitor the device to make sure that it's ready. Do our people know how to access the devices at these sites they're going to be at, and how to get to it when something happens? Is there a plan in place to be able to get to the equipment in a timely fashion when it's needed if they're on a large job site? So you need to look at the actual opportunity to assess the situation prior to needing it, so we can lay out the playbook ahead of time if something were to happen as to how everything would fall into place. So there's a number of different things that can be done, and then it's a big pie and has lots of slices to it, and some people may do very well on their own with certain parts of that, and they don't need all the slices of the pie. But for someone who needs all the pie slices, there is a number of things in that playbook that they should be advised of to make sure they have the high functioning program that needs to be in place for them to have positive results when something happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of getting organizations, it's hard, right? You have the playbook, but like at the simplest form, it's, acquiring that device and making sure that its visibility is the highest priority. Everybody knows where it's at, that it's located in this specific spot. This is what its purpose is, establishing the dedicated team, the quarterback. I like that phrase. I always use champion, but I like quarterback, and having that, and then developing who is the team, what is the emergency action plan to help ensure that these programs are maintained and staying in place. So it's all really critical, right? The regular training and all of those things that you're speaking to, keeping the team prepared and confident. Those are the most.
Yeah, that emergency response plan comes into play in so many different ways, because you could have an AED in an office building, in an office setting, that would potentially be totally different on a construction site or at
Right.
a stadium versus a little league, practice, whether it's football or baseball or whatever it is. And those are all very unique settings, and you need to have the plan for those locations, whether it is kept in the shed, the AD where the little league practice is at, so it's always there, or the coach has to bring it and everyone knows that it's in the coach's bag, in the first aid kit on the sideline. So those are unique situations for when kids and adults are having sporting events remote to any buildings or on fields, versus the large construction site that, as it grows and a building grows out of the ground and you're on the 20th story building now, how do you access the emergency equipment on the 20th story in a construction site? Where is that a safety station at, or where is that equipment at? How do we access it? It may change on a weekly basis, as to what the emergency response plan could be, because as you grow up out of the ground, the ability to get an AED from when it was on the ground floor before, and now it's the 20th story.
Yeah.
Where are we at to have a program in place that covers something like that? Versus you're on a ship, versus you're in a plane. Every plane that has passengers has an AED that the flight attendants are trained on to use, and that if someone needed it, they would need to be able to access it. So the unique settings where we have AEDs have really their own challenges of making sure people are aware of how to access the AED, and then also making sure that it's properly being maintained and ready for use.
Yeah, I mean, in those scenarios, like in your experience, I guess I'm curious, like what is the importance of leadership buy-in, when you're talking about these programs?
Well, actually, it comes back to the champion, and maybe it's the quarterback, and they might be two different people. Is you have an organization that, large or small, wants to put a program in place. So there's a champion saying, "Hey, we need to do this," and then whoever's going to implement the program, that quarterback, needs to understand the value of making sure that they communicate out to the whole team, whether it's the person that cleans the building to the person that's the top executive. They know how to get into the program to get what needs to be gotten when there's an emergency. So everyone has a role in knowing where equipment is, knowing that the equipment is available, knowing who's trained if you didn't have an immediate trained individual. So it's really disseminating the information. So you want to have normal conversations with people about life-saving actions ahead of time, whether that's in training or having it communicated in a bulletin to the staff, and then tracking, and documenting the program so people are familiar with all the pieces of that puzzle, because it is a puzzle putting a program together, and all the pieces come together, and your puzzle should look complete. And then that's where technology comes into play, and that can be part of that puzzle to make sure that the readiness of the equipment is there, and the people that are going to be doing some routine checks and making sure they're aware of what they're looking for, and making sure that ready kit's there, making sure that the equipment is clean and unobstructed. So with new laws in different states, you have new chances to make safer venues within restaurants and grocery stores. In Maryland, we just went through, and having AEDs in the right place in the grocery store, because they're not relying on staff as much, but as people who are shopping. So you want to make sure your customers, who are your doctors, nurses, paramedics, EMTs, firefighters, know that there's an AED there. So if something were to happen, they know how to access at their local grocery store. And same with a restaurant, where it's supposed to be forward facing for customers to see and use, because the customer in that situation might be the person using it, and not potentially the staff, and how some of the laws were written. So it is about placement. It is about making sure it's visible, so that the people who might normally use AEDs in their line of work, and they're not at work, how to access when there is an emergency where they're at, without their police car or fire truck or ambulance or their ER or whatever it might be, but they can access the equipment that's going to make a huge difference in that very short amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I really think that, as I think through just AED programs in general, you know, Jeremy, I'm curious, what advice would you give to someone who really wants to build a stronger response culture, not just the compliance, right? They don't want to just check off the boxes. What advice would you give them?
I think one is, when they're setting up the program, make sure that they let everybody know that there are devices available. Don't have to go up to somebody and say, "Can you tell me where the AED is?" And they have to ask you what an AED is. So make sure you roll that information up front, that and AEDs are explained what they are, the value of having them, and where they're going to be. So I think it's planting the seeds and planting the fields ahead of time, so you can grow the crops you want, and then making sure that you water them. And that is not just putting them on the wall and forgetting about them, but do lunch and learns, do different things, maybe even a drill, surprise people, or have planned drills and then unplanned drills. So keep it at the forefront of people's minds, because 5 years from now, if you haven't done anything and going to use it, it may not have the same response as opposed if it was 6 months or a year after your training, versus if do continual training and be able to allow people to ask questions, and have people that you can go to ask questions to, that know how to guide people through setting up a program or doing continuing education. But it shouldn't be just placing the device on the wall and then forgetting about it. So it's really engaging your people and having reminders, whether it's Heart Month, in February, being able to say, okay, let's do our CPR training in February, every February, because it's Heart Month, and talk about, where our equipment is, and just do a reminder. It should be done on a somewhat regular basis to keep it on people's minds, whether it's sending an email out once in a while, or having someone set up and post up and then just review the AED when people come to work. Or there's a number of different ways people can keep this in people's minds, so that they know where their equipment is, and they have the ability to act and respond in the appropriate time and fashion when the need arises.
Yeah, I mean, I really think as I think about AED programs and the vast majority of sizes and locations and all the things is, you know, if I could put a bow on it, I would just say ask for help, right? Like there are specific programs and people who have expertise in managing programs. So if you're adopting an AED program, whether it be one, whether it be many, whether it be thousands, you know, interact with, you know, don't feel like it is a task that has to be taken all on as an individual or as a business. Use the resources, use the people who have, you know, finite understanding, right? Like you, Jeremy, who've been in this. There's people who understand how to implement programs, help to ensure, you know, you have the right product, the right technology, the right placement, the right training, and the ongoing, you know, not just at day 1, but at day 20 and at day 300. And, you know, it's a program, it's a journey, and it's not a one-time thing. So as I think through kind of final thoughts as we talk about this, using the resources and not making it a company-owned sole responsibility, but utilizing resources to help oversee a program, I think is the most critical. Because as you were just describing, when to do and who's keeping track of when the next quarterly refresher is, that champion, that quarterback, they have a full-time role, right? They have a full-time job, and it isn't necessarily AED program manager. So work with and coordinate with people who can help support that and that person, I think is the most critical piece. Because it's a big job and it's a super important job. And again, having that relationship, somebody retires, somebody moves on, you have somebody else who's keeping a beat and an eye on that program to make sure it's not getting lost and it's getting shifted where necessary when needed. So.
Yeah, 100%. You're only, like I said before, as strong as your weakest link.
Yep.
And let someone else take a look at all the links you have in your program and to see if they can potentially have another set of eyes looking at all your links to make sure that you're where you need to be to hopefully, if something were to happen, have that successful response. So yeah, it really is. So as you said, I mean, look at the whole picture and don't be afraid to ask people who do this every day to help people set up programs to get their advice and look at another set of eyes to make sure you're doing everything you can to have the best possible program.
Beautiful. Sorry, so on to Q&A.
No, yeah, thank you so much for to you both for this wonderful presentation and for sharing your insights with us. Before we start the Q&A, we want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar. Your input is important because it does help us improve our future webcast. We've gotten a few questions here, and thank you so much to everyone who has submitted. First question, is there a distance requirement as to how far you need to travel to get an AED, like there are parameters for fire extinguishers?
The answer to that question is it's really from drop to shock. So, you know, it can be distance, but it's more time. So it depends on the location you're talking about putting a program in. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is that 3 minutes from drop to shock. So you need to be able to come from a patient who's collapsed to go to an AED in approximately 60 seconds at a fast-paced walk, back to him within 60 seconds, and then have about 60 seconds to prepare the patient for the pads and let it do its analysis and then provide the first shock. And we look at that as like about a 70% chance of survival if CPR hasn't been done from the initial go down. If it has, then it would be more closer to the 80% chance of survival with high quality CPR. So you have to look at your position within your facilities. Do you have locked entrances? Do you have key cards? Do you have, you know, to get you through locked locations? So it all depends on each location, but not as much distance than it would take time, but certainly distance is part of that. And we would look at how far a device would be, you know, from maybe fields at a school or in a building to traverse 20 floors if you have, you know, elevators that run well or not well, you know. So I think it's really on a given day what it would take to get to that device within 60 seconds.
Our next question, what is a good arrangement for who receives the remote monitoring transmissions? How does that technology work? Is it tied into another monitoring system, have its own, or does it go into a does it go to a computer monitor?
So it's a number of different ways it could be done depending on the technology you're using. So there's multiple organizations such as RescueStat and then the AED manufacturers that have databases that the information is put into via remote monitoring, whether it's cellular, Wi-Fi, or IoT technology. And then there are parameters who you would set up to get the notifications. So whether it's the manager of the program or a site person, depending on how many sites there are. So it can be set up in a number of different ways and also different levels. So you could have the parent receiving them and then a child and then a grandchild. So it could have, if something happens in the program, the parent in charge of the whole program can get a notification, and then it could get granular down to the location and site of the organization. So maybe an organization has 1,000 devices and one of their AEDs was used in Florida and Tampa. It could let the person in Tampa know who's responsible that AED was used at that location or is being used. So it can be set up in many different levels and forms depending on what the customer wants and who they want to receive the information.
As a quick reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and press send. Our next question, if you provide AEDs on your property, do all employees have to be trained and expected to use them, or can you have only a certain portion of the employee population designated as responders?
It's independent of the organization to decide what they want. It's always good to have a number of people trained. It'd be amazing to have everyone trained because you never know who's going to be the responder at any given time. And in some locations, they're not requiring training with new laws that were placed, like I discussed in Maryland, is if you put an AED in a restaurant, you don't necessarily have to train the staff because they just want the AEDs to be there, hoping that the patrons would respond. And that's why it has to be in a public facing place. But if an organization is going to put an AED program in place, it is definitely better to have somebody learn how to ride the bicycle before they have to ride it. So knowing what to do makes a huge difference and increases the time, really decreases the time that an AED would be actually placed properly on a patient and used if you knew what to do ahead of time. But obviously every AED has very good communication, some a little better than others, but they will guide you through the rescue. But having done it ahead of time and practiced, would give you more opportunity to have it done quicker. So the answer really is it's great to have people trained. I recommend 10 to 20% of the staff be trained in a facility. The more the merrier, the more the better. But like I said, having an AED is great and it is all about the program, but training is important. But in some areas, they recognize that turnover in staff and things of that nature, they just want to make sure the public has access to it because they know in a lot of situations, the public will come forward and use the equipment provided. So in that situation, they don't necessarily require their staff to be trained, but I would say 10 to 20% would be a good number and better to have more people trained than not.
Our next question kind of gives a scenario that the timing is 3 minutes in a factory where we have slip, trip, and fall hazards, multiple stories, multiple break rooms. This person said, I would feel comfortable with, I'm guessing, 10 minutes. Any recommendation as to how many AEDs and how I would determine how many I would need in this huge food processing facility?
That's a great question. And I think that's where you bring an expert in to help guide you through that process, to look at the facility and look at, how the flow of people are. And then, like we talked about, break rooms, bathrooms, areas in the facility where there's a congregating of, where people tend to be in, and then doing that 3 minute from drop to shock, appropriately. And then if you have emergency response teams, preparing them so they can grab and go, and they're in the bags or kits are in the right place so they can grab and go to somebody in a timely fashion, depending on how their notification system works. They can set up, AEDs and other medical equipment in spaces where their team can respond quickly and grab it and go. So maybe they have it at their workplace, at their workstation, and they have a radio or some type of overhead page or some way of alerting them. And then that helps with timing because they don't have to go find the equipment. It's where they're at. And that gives them a little more time to go a farther distance and still meet that 3 minutes from drop to shock, how they place the equipment and who they place that equipment with. So there's a number of different ways that you could scale a program appropriately, utilizing responders that are trained and having equipment with them, and then having it for general use and how you place them in the facility. But we can certainly look at that and help guide them on how a program can look, maybe for AEDs that are placed, and then AEDs that are with people that can respond to incidents.
Our next question, what would be your recommendations on how to run a lunch and learn without opening equipment? Or if the equipment is open, how do we simulate as close to kind of real life or real time?
So there's some great videos that the individual manufacturers have made that are free and on the web, that they can go and pull down and watch those videos of the unique AEDs that they have on site. I think if there's a champion that has more knowledge than somebody else, they can talk about it with the videos and give their opinions and views on, responding on a program. But what that does is it creates awareness. It creates people talking about it, gets more of the questions that people may have when they before they came to that lunch and learn, so they can get them answered, and then have an expert that they can go to if they have questions that they can't answer, such as Rescue Stat or Rescue One or American Heart Association or some of the other vested partners that make AED programs and training, what it is today. So there are a number of different tools out there that they can get as well, that they can have a mannequin and a training device that they can use at that lunch and learn and bring that out in the lunch and learn and also use for drills. So there's a number of different ways they could have a lunch and learn that's very inexpensive, but very rewarding when it comes to the end result of having people aware of what they have and how to use it and get those questions answered in a lunch and learn. And they can also bring in someone remotely, where you can have a Teams meeting and then have an expert on the line running that lunch and learn for you and showing some videos and going over best practices as well.
Our next question, are there any legal concerns with someone who's not officially trained using an AED in our facility?
No, because every AED that's used is covered under the Good Samaritan law, and it will walk them through what to do. It's not going to shock anybody erroneously if an AED is placed on an unconscious, unresponsive patient. The AED will assess and determine if therapy is needed, and if it is, it'll provide that therapy with a shock and then coach the person to do CPR. So the Good Samaritan law does go into it in every state as to, covering people for liability if an AED was used or other first aid procedures were used, and they did it without, I guess, saying that they use common sense and they followed, what the device recommended to do.
Our next question, what are the best ways to alert trained responders in a large facility without a paging system?
There's technology out there that some of the AEDs will provide an email, which is not the best way, but you could have cellular phone numbers that are available to be called, texting. Some of the cell phones have radio features to them where you could have it as a radio and be able to alert people. If depending on the facility and what technology they already have in place, they may be able to use some of the technology they already have in place, or they could, there's new radio devices that could be used. So there's a number of different ways of having team members having access to being notified when something happens, whether it's a call down tree at a desk, whether it's a radio, or like if there's not a paging system, but there would be some technology that would definitely help that could be used.
This is in response to the simulation question. We bought trainer AEDs so you can walk through the whole process.
So yeah, so trainer AEDs, if you put a program in place and you're using a specific AED, every AED out there has a trainer that goes with it that is a non-functioning live device but could be used in training. So, and if you have a opportunity to get the appropriate mannequin that gives you CPR feedback, and then the trainer that you have, or a generic trainer, just to walk through the steps of, how an AED is turned on, whether it's lifting a lid or pushing a button, and then going through the process of placing pads in the right place, and then allowing the AED to operate as normal, whether it's a fully automated AED where once it senses a shock is needed and it gives a shock, or a semi-automatic AED where once the pads are placed, it'll advise the rescuer to push the flashing button after the AED determines therapy is needed. So having a trainer definitely makes a difference because you get to play with it without having to use the live unit, but it operates the same. And if you needed to, you could use a generic unit. It'll basically take you through the steps as well, but not, 100% with what the unit that you probably have sitting in your AED box or in your organization.
Keynote
What
on that one though, don't keep that training unit as accessible as a real one. So there's no incidental grabs.
Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question and press send. Next question, how do we keep our team trained and aware, especially with high turnover or remote locations?
You could have, a electronic EMR or a system that they can go in and do training on the web where they can have if your company is large enough, you can set up, what your policies and procedures are, goes over CPR, it goes over the specific equipment that you have. So an LMS, if it's a company that has an LMS system, you could place this on your LMS system. You could have something on YouTube where it's a certain link that has been created and put on YouTube, so it could be put out to company members to quarterly reviews. So there's a number of different ways, whether it's a YouTube video that's created specifically for you, or an LMS system that has a program for you, or something that is put out by one of the larger training companies that is there for review or training. So I think there's a lot of different ways that people can have ongoing training.
Yeah, and if I can, I want to add to that. When you're working with oftentimes the different program management type companies, there is exactly kind of as Jeremy mentioned, there are kind of refreshers or in those programs where things are monitored, they're kind of monitored through dashboarding and like an online portal. So as new employees come on, interacting with those companies to engage them in the program, and all those kind of types of videos that Jeremy's mentioning, or even training refresher, may be things that are available through that. Again, it's kind of feeding that as on new people are coming on board, keeping that investment and pulling them into the program is a great way to keep them engaged and trained.
Our next question, what are some common mistakes organizations make after purchasing AEDs?
I think it's mainly not checking and making sure their AED is functioning after a period of time, because the battery, depending on the battery of the device and the pads, will be expired and potentially the battery drained all the way down and not being replaced in a timely fashion. I think that's one of the biggest problems, is not having your equipment function over a period of time that the AED was placed and no one monitored, took care of it. That's one that I see as one big red flag first of all.
Yeah, it's seen as the finish, not the start.
Our next question, we have multiple AEDs across several sites. What's the best way to manage them all consistently?
I think program management system with an organization that does it professionally can keep track of all the equipment, expiration dates, and people who are trained, and when service is needed, and if there's a use that they can help you download the event and replace the durable goods. So it's really engaging in an organization that can help you tie the knot and keep the bow tied, with having all the pieces of that puzzle properly managed in a timely fashion.
Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, please click the Q&A button, type your question and press send. Anything else you all would like to add as we have a minute plus here?
I mean, yeah, I'll just add, I think it's been a great discussion. I mean, Jeremy, you've been doing this for so long, so I really appreciate the insights and those different things, your experience and what you've run into. I kind of going back to final thoughts, I think for organizations looking to acquire AEDs or who have AEDs, take a firm assessment on what they look like and how you feel the maintenance, is going on those devices. And do you have emergency action plans in place? And do you have trained responders? Or when was the last time you looked at it? Look into your program and see what kind of gaps may or may not exist, because it's better to do it now than in a moment of need. So.
Yeah, excellent. All great words, Dana. Yeah, nothing much more to add except that you're only as strong as your weakest link, like we said. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on all the pieces of the program and let somebody else help you with that if you don't have a strong ability to make sure you're doing everything possible to make sure your program is where it needs to be.
Well, thank you so much to you both. This ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I'd like to thank our awesome presenters, Dana Miller and Jeremy Gruber, the entire team from our sponsor, RescueStat, and of course, all of you who joined us today. Take care and have a safe day.
Thanks.
Thank you.